Thanks for having me.
We've had a whirlwind morning, haven't we?
We have. Very enjoyable, though. No nonsense here.
Good.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it. So we're here to talk about Cleanco and you and your journey on it. But first, let's hear about Cleanco. What was the inspiration?
Well, it was born out of my own sobriety. And, I was looking to plug a hole, in my own life. So I drank to excess pretty regularly, both professionally and for fun. Throughout the course of my 20s, I was a city broker at ICAP. Very ordinary to drink high levels of alcohol whilst entertaining clients. And then, essentially, it began to take a toll on my health, I felt. And more importantly, almost than that to me, was I began to feel that my full potential was kind of slipping away. And that it worried me, right? I've always had really high expectations of myself. I've always been really ambitious without ever really having a plan, right? So just kind of growing up, I always wanted to do something exciting or do something interesting. And I kind of, never felt fully fulfilled in my passion to kind of drive that desire, before Cleanco. So I was sober for about 4 months. This was just before the birth of Theodore, our first child. I was at a party one night and I was offered a non-alcoholic gin and tonic, and I'd never heard of that before. And I thought to myself, what an incredible concept, right? Because non-alcoholic beer has been around for 23 years. I believe Caliber was the first brand. But it's only recently become really mainstream, and that's, in my opinion, because the products have caught up to the expectation of the consumer, right? They're good enough now, they're delicious, in fact, for there to be demand and therefore trigger vast marketing spends from large businesses such as Heineken to really put non-alcoholic beer on the map. Now, that hasn't happened yet for non-alcoholic spirits, but it's my belief that it will. So for me, back when non-alcoholic spirits was, completely unknown, I decided kind of then and there that I thought I could do it better than the brand that was in my hands, and that I wanted to create a non-alcoholic range of spirits that could directly replace their alcoholic counterparts and provide people with choice without compromise when it comes to choosing what they're going to drink. And for me, it's just been, I haven't stopped since, and that was kind of coming up on 3 years ago.
And you're really, in a way, sort of creating and pushing a market, aren't you? Because, as you say, what you're doing with Cleanco isn't yet mainstream, but you're helping establish low-alcohol, non-alcoholic drinks as mainstream as well. That's a really deep sense of purpose. That must drive you quite a lot.
Absolutely. And we couldn't do it without others trying as well, right? I think you hear a lot of entrepreneurs saying, well, we're creating a category, and we are, but others are too. And I think, the more people that get involved in this booming, exciting category, the better. The stronger the competition, the better. The better the products, the better. All of this stuff matters. We want to do as a business for alcoholic cocktails, right? I feel like a gin and tonic. I don't want to have a soda water or a Diet Coke. I want to have a gin and tonic, right? But with no alcohol. So that's where it came from. And we wanted to make the liquids kind of as similar to their alcoholic equivalents as possible. But it's exciting. And look, there are others doing it. We're very proud to be the leading UK independent non-alcoholic spirits brand. That's across all wine, spirits, beer. And that does drive me, right? That is not being the best or hoping to be the best, but that's the purpose of the business, is to be the best tasting and the largest in the world.
And you talked about your sobriety in a way, giving you this sense of enlightenment and unlocking extra dimensions in your life. Cleanco, of course, being one of them. What are the other things that it unlocked?
The change in my life was, it's almost difficult to describe, right? And I've kind of done a poor job with it in the past, as describing it as kind of driving a very fast car with the handbrake on, and like just kind of struggling to get to where you want to get to, because I want to do everything yesterday, right? I set myself strange pace, right? And if I'm not fully with it, I can't keep up with myself almost. So it's kind of, sobriety made me clearer, more driven, more ambitious. Above all, it gave me more hours in my day, right? That's the biggest thing I noticed. Like, you're just not wasting, and I'm not saying that people who drink alcohol are wasting time, because I'm sure you're having very meaningful relationships with your family, with your friends, and that's not a problem. I'm talking about drinking to excess, becoming drunk, not being able to fully function or operate. That's a problem, right? So for me, it unlocked a new dimension in the sense that I had more time and clarity to achieve the things that I want to achieve, right? So the average person in the UK spends 252 hours hungover every year. Yeah. I'd say I was a lot more than that, right? Yeah, 252 hours. And so our most recent messaging with the business is, some say we sell, the average person spends 252 hours hungover per year. Some say we sell non-alcoholic spirits. We say we sell time, right? And I was in Shoreditch yesterday. I'm not a TikToker, but the business does now have TikTok, because I think it's absolutely essential that we eventually get on board with it. And I went around just asking strangers in the street, what would you do with a spare 252 hours? And I think it's quite thought-provoking, right? It's a long time. It's 10 and a half days, right? So you're adding 10 and a half days to your year. You could start a side hustle in that time, right? You could learn a new language. You could take up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and probably achieve your blue belt in that time. Become a really proficient martial artist. All sorts of stuff, fun stuff that you may feel like you don't have the time. And I think that concept of selling time is more exciting at this stage of our growth than selling non-alcoholic spirits. And of course that's what we sell, right? But I think it's more thought-provoking to give you back your morning.
And Spencer, the thing which strikes me about you and Cleanco is that there's such a clarity of message and purpose. How did you get there? And what's your advice for, I suppose, other people who are starting on that journey to establish that sort of clarity and sense of, something beyond what they're just selling?
Well, we haven't always had that, right? And we've made so many mistakes. The company message has changed countless times. The brand has changed countless times. The bottles have changed. The logo has changed. The company name changed. We used to be called the Clean Liquor Company. And that is my impatience, right? That is having to get something in front of you now, right? And that is not the optimum way of doing things, in my opinion. And, I gave an interview this morning about, advice, and I would say, breathe and just slow the thing down, even slightly, right? And just to take the best advice you can get. Not all advice is good advice, by the way, and that's something else that we can talk about. But it's very important, in my opinion, to have a consistent company message, which is exactly what you've just mentioned. But, I'm guilty of putting stuff out there and releasing stuff that I didn't find that exciting, just because at the time I couldn't think of something better, right? And that's a shame. I think a life less wasted thing, sorry, which I'm not even sure I mentioned, the overarching message is a life less wasted. Hopefully, you get the double play on the being actually physically less wasted, but also wasting less time. And I think that resonates with people, and that's where we are, right? But it took us 2.5 years to get to that messaging.
Wow. So a lot of honing, a lot of experimentation as well. That's really interesting.
It used to be, if you like gin, it's like gin. At one point, when we were having a lot of fun, it was going to be booze for people with shit to do. But we realised that might be kind of unnecessarily aggressive towards people that consume alcohol, which is, of course, pretty much everyone. So. The market and the company message is one of moderation, for sure. It's, you don't have to, if you think you're drinking too much, or you want to cut back on alcohol for health purposes, or whatever your reason might be, whether it be for a round, a week, a month, a year, we are here to offer you, a seemingly alcoholic drink with very little compromise, with no sugar, no sweeteners, very few calories. And you'll have a similar experience, to the point where I believe, if you came around to my house and I gave you a clean gin and tonic and you had asked for a gin and tonic, I'm not sure you'd bring it up.
Wow, that is quite impressive. I want to take a little bit of a step back. A lot of people who start businesses, whether it be a side hustle or it's their kind of main event, I think quickly realise that you have to devote a lot of time, mental energy, finances, etc. to the business, but a lot of yourself as well. And not everything is always okay. Some people have to deal with difficulty and challenges. Some people have to deal with tragedy. I know in your case, your brother Michael unfortunately passed. That must have been a huge life-altering event. How does something like that shape you as an individual and your drive, and how can you sort of turn some of those experiences into a positive experience on your business journey?
I think living up to kind of almost unreasonable expectations could have come from that. So Michael, just for context, was the youngest Brit to ever reach the summit of Mount Everest. He was 22, so a year younger than Bear Grylls, who did it the year after, or the year before, sorry. So, he for it the year before. So for a period, Mike became the youngest Brit, and then unfortunately that record was lost, a few hours later. But he was an overachiever in many ways, and he was very different to me, by the way. He's not a massively outspoken person. He was very modest, and just kind of a calm, very loving individual, from what I'm told. Anyway, I was 10 when he passed, so I knew him in the sense that I loved him, but I wasn't. I obviously didn't know the details of his kind of who he was and his character, other than that he was an amazing brother. But he was a very successful trader, like a very successful trader in the city. He had, I won't go into too much detail, but he had made, a really significant, kind of, you could call it a fortune, like at that age, before he, and it was just, I always grew up thinking how impressive that was, and just how brave he was to even go to Everest at that age. Everest now, and I can tell you about it because I've just come back from base camp. I was there for 5.5 weeks. Recently, anyway, I'll go into it in just a sec. But Everest in 1999 was incredibly different to Everest today, and all of the kit, was just, very different, very heavy, and operationally different, right? So also, being able to predict the weather, etc., it was tougher back then. So the risk of climbing the mountain was significantly higher. So for a 22-year-old kid to do it, when no other kid of that age had ever done it before from this country, I thought was just very powerful. And recently, I was just there. I made a film about recovering his body, and it'll be on Disney Plus early next year. And Bear Grylls was involved as a producer, and the whole thing was very powerful for me. And I've probably never felt closer to him than I have in recent times. But I think him losing his life in that way probably contributed to me wanting to do big things with my life, right? I think you're a product of your surroundings, when you're growing up, and you're brought up by your parents. And I feel that growing up, I had a wonderful childhood full of love, but my father is quite a hard northerner, right? His father was a coal miner, and the kind of family became successful, I guess, under him, right? Before him, there was nothing. So he is a very interesting and well thought through entrepreneur who I've learned a lot from. And I love my dad, but just we grew up in a very try not to say it, we basically, as a kid, weakness was overshadowed with, it wasn't really fully acceptable to be weak, right? So I feel that I've always had these high goals and high expectations of myself, because I've always wanted to drive myself, through walls to be the biggest and best thing that I can be. And that was only possible through sobriety. Like alcohol really hindered that for me for a long period of my life.
Spencer, you've grown such a successful business. Congratulations. Thanks. If you had the magic wand and could turn back time, what would be the one thing you would do differently?
It's kind of hard to... It's hard to change, a formula that I've kind of fallen in love with, I suppose. I guess I would have trusted my gut more. Like, not all advice is fantastic advice. I think when I first started, I knew so little that, I was kind of like, what should we do here? Or what should we do there? To people who I thought knew better. And of course, it's not always the right thing to do. I think I would have, breathed, just slowed it down a bit, achieved a greater level of consistency before launch. We were making pretty significant changes like throughout the period that we launched in. And then I think just, not running before you can walk, right? Just understanding a reasonable time frame for delivery of what you think you can deliver. Because I think people are so used to seeing, enormous hockey stick grow up. I think slower, steadier growth is appreciated by everyone. Unless, of course, you get lucky and, the tides change and you suddenly have some massive, mad 10x year. Great, no problem, super, we all want that, right? But I think, particularly in today's macroeconomic climate, setting reasonable expectations for a business, even if you have to resize it and rethink it, people appreciate it.
You do strike me as the sort of person who has that sense of focus and drive. What about people who don't necessarily have as much of that or haven't honed it in the same way that you have? What's your advice to those folk who think, do you know what, I'd love to kind of break out of the kind of routine 9 to 5 and follow my passions, create something, but I just don't feel like I'm that sort of person?
Maybe set yourself a physical challenge. Just thinking about it, sorry, I haven't considered the question before that, but, I find that, creating hardship, in your life, or perhaps you have already lived through hardship, I think it's all helpful, right? But, for me, as I said, who had, a nice childhood for all intents and purposes, minus the death of my brother, it's important to set yourself challenges to really figure out who you are. And so I know a lot of what I'm saying sounds a bit wishy-washy and a bit kind of, emotional, but it's, if you take the Marathon des Sables as an example, right? I had no business being there at all, right? I'm not an elite athlete, I'm not an ultra runner, and when I went sober, all of these things began to feel like they could be in reach, whereas before I would just immediately dismiss them as, well, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Why would you want to run 250 kilometers in the Sahara Desert? That's dumb. Like what kind of a person do you have to be to do that? And all of a sudden you begin to realize and understand what drives people to do these things. And my advice to people would be, put yourself out of your comfort zone. It doesn't matter if you fail. Of course, if it's going to drain your time and be a detriment to your family, and then perhaps consider it. But those who don't take risks will not be rewarded, right? And I feel that the Marathon des Sables for me was a perfect example of something that I knew was going to be incredibly difficult. I knew I would come close to breaking point, but surviving it and pushing through it, meant that I felt that anything is achievable, right? And that is helpful in business. One thing of advice, if anyone cares or wants to know, is, I meet a lot of entrepreneurs who are funding their own side hustle at the beginning, and that to me is quite risky, right? Because it takes quite a lot to get a business off the ground, and it can be alarmingly expensive, and money always drains far faster than you think it might. Plans change, forecasts change. Time scales change. It all changes, right? So if you're doing, even 5K here, 10K there, 50K, it's to me it's dangerous. Like, an investor who perhaps isn't creative will always be at least available to hear a great idea, right? The world is full of money and investors. And, I don't know all of them, but, I put my neck out and went and spoke to people I'd never spoken to before. Our friends and family round was really small, the portion of it. We were able, I was able to raise money from funds, people I'd never met, through just being connected to people. And I think the passion, the clearly really caring about it and them understanding that you're happy to dedicate, a huge chunk of your life to it, to try and make it work, excites people. And then you share in the risk. And I think it's really important to share in the risk. Nobody can do anything on their own. Everybody needs advice. Everybody needs help. Most businesses need funding. Share the risk.
And final question from me, because I know you need to go. What about building awareness of what you've created, this sort of wonderful kind of game-changing product? Now, obviously, you're a little bit different from most people in the sense that you have a public profile, but what did you find worked best for Cleanco without spending millions of pounds in advertising money?
I mean, social media, right, is free advertising. It depends how you want to do it and how, of course, it's not free if you want to, do large professional shoots, but also, social media gives you the ability to talk to people, without knowing them, without having access to them. So it's a huge marketing tool. It's in fact the only thing I see it as, right? I don't see Instagram as an insight into my life. Like, I couldn't care less, right? For me, it's a marketing tool. And I use it to promote things and sell product, or not even sell product, just make people aware of what we're doing, right? And it's interesting. I think, when I started Cleanco, it's probably the only time that I've been happy about some of the questionable decisions I've made in television, because I think it was important, right, to have some kind of profile. And I think it's, people really listened. I was so, and I don't mind saying, I don't really get nervous, right? Like, I'm not a nervy kind of person. When I created the first post to go out on the Cleanco account, I was freaking out. Like I was so nervous, right? Because imagine, you pour your heart and soul into this post about what you're going to dedicate, years of your life to, and just people don't care. And it was nerve-wracking. It was worse than the Marathon des Sables, I'd say, right? Like, no, seriously, because if nobody responds to it, or people don't care, or you post one of those things where you get, 800 likes and 3 comments, what are you going to do, right? Like, how else do you get it out? So for me, fortunately, it was, alarmingly well received, and people, I think, could feel the passion, and that's a big thing. But for others, I think, gifting is fantastic. Influencers, although I hate to say it, is a really good way to move stuff. People can work on revenue shares now, so you don't even need to, it's not going to positively impact your top line per se, but it will grow awareness of your brand. Gifting, if you're able to create a product and get it in the hands of people who you think might be able to help you, or you think might love your product, based on their profile, try and get it in their hands. You want to try and make as